All right, welcome to a deep dive into Eremition. Have you heard of this?
Eremition, a journey inward of a life observed.
Yeah, it's a collection of essays.
Essays, right. By Claire Gamboa,
Claire Gamboa.
published just last year in 2025.
Yes.
And we're going to be taking a look at, I don't know, kind of like love and relationships and self-discovery.
The big mix. Those are some big topics.
Big topics, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, what do you think? How do you think she takes on these big topics?
Well, that's what's so fascinating about the book is that these are intimidating topics.
Yeah.
You know, love, relationships, self-discovery. And she breaks them down into such relatable pieces.
Uh-huh.
You know, it's like reading advice from a wise friend.
Yeah, it's like a roadmap.
Yeah, like a roadmap.
Almost.
Almost.
For navigating life.
Exactly.
And she doesn't hold back. She's really honest about her own struggles.
Yes.
So let's start maybe at the beginning. Love is a lonely word.
So right off the bat, she defines love as a lonely word. What do you think about that? What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's paradoxical, isn't it?
Right.
You think about love and you think about connection.
Togetherness.
Yeah, and she's saying it's a lonely word.
Yeah.
So I think what she's hinting at is that inherent risk in love.
Mm-hmm.
That when you put yourself out there, it can be a very lonely experience, especially if it's not reciprocated.
And she has this one story about confessing her feelings to a friend.
Yes.
And that is like, you know, a lot of people can relate to that.
Oh, absolutely.
Have you ever been in that situation?
I think everyone's been in a situation where they've had to decide, do I risk this friendship
Right.
for something more? And it takes a lot of courage to do that.
Courage, yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, even in relationships, there's that risk and that vulnerability.
Yeah, vulnerability is always there.
Yeah.
And, speaking of vulnerability, she talks about infidelity.
Oh, yeah.
She brings up a study about, why people cheat.
Interesting.
And what they found is that often it's not about the sex itself,
Okay.
but rather about these deeper emotional needs that aren't being met in the relationship.
And then that study also found that only 1/3 of people who cheat actually confess to it.
Right.
Isn't that interesting?
And that's fascinating.
And that women are more likely to admit to it than men.
Interesting. Right.
What do you think that says about how we communicate in relationships?
I think it speaks to, well, first of all, the need to create a safe space for honesty,
Right.
even when it's difficult. Because sometimes the truth is hard.
Yeah.
But I think it also speaks to the fact that we often focus on the surface level issues in relationships
Mm-hmm.
rather than addressing those underlying emotional needs.
Right.
So maybe this deep dive is a good way to, prompt you to think about your own relationships
Mm-hmm.
and whether there are any unmet needs
Yeah.
that need addressing.
That's a good point. Now, when it comes to relationships, she's very, very clear about her stance on monogamy.
Yes, very much so.
And she says she believes in the, sacredness of intimacy with one partner.
Yes.
And she's not into open relationships
No.
at all. What do you think about that?
Well, I understand her perspective, and I think it's a valid one. I wonder if, her strong stance on monogamy stems from perhaps that fear of unmet needs and vulnerability we were just talking about.
Right. So maybe she's protecting herself from those risks.
It's something to consider. And I think, we all get caught up in what society tells us a relationship should look like.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, what matters is what works for you and your partner.
Right. So we talked about love and vulnerability and even a little bit about cheating.
Right.
So now let's get into navigating the self, this next part of the book.
Yeah, this is where she starts looking inward
Yeah.
and exploring how our personal experiences, even from childhood, influence how we interact with the world
Yep.
and how we see things.
And she starts with this idea of projection,
Oh, yeah.
where we put our own feelings onto other people.
Right.
She actually learned about this from a confidant.
Yeah.
And it totally changed how she saw interactions and stuff.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Has that ever happened to you?
Oh, yeah. Where some new concept just
Yeah, and it's like
changes your perspective.
changes your perspective totally.
Yeah.
And it can be really helpful for navigating,
tricky relationship.
relationships. Yeah.
Especially with, difficult people.
Mm.
I think it's really easy to blame others for our emotional reactions.
Mhm.
But when you start to see that maybe you're projecting, it helps you kind of own your feelings
Right.
and communicate more effectively.
That's true. And speaking of difficult relationships, she talks about loneliness,
Yeah.
and she brings up this crazy statistic.
Oh, yeah. 1 in 4 people globally feel lonely.
I know.
And young adults are the most affected. It's like, even with
It's crazy, right?
social media,
All the connection.
all the connection, yeah.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if we're like losing the ability to connect in person.
Well, I think that's a great point. It makes you think, does all this online connection actually make us more isolated?
Right.
Because we're constantly comparing ourselves to, curated online personas.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right. We need to nurture those in-person skills.
Yeah. Yeah. Where you
Yeah.
can actually like feel someone's energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And that ties into what Claire talks about in the book with setting boundaries.
Oh, yeah. Boundaries.
Especially with what she calls man-children and toxic friends.
Okay. What is a man-child?
Well, she's referring to adults who, kind of exhibit those immature behaviors.
Okay.
They lack emotional maturity.
Got it.
The people who just constantly avoid responsibility,
Oh, okay.
blame others, create drama.
Got it.
So it's not really about criticizing men.
Right.
It's more about highlighting a pattern of behavior
Right. Right.
that can be damaging in any relationship.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So she's talking about setting boundaries.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Recognizing when a relationship is causing more harm than good.
Right.
And it's about self-respect. Like
Yeah.
sometimes you have to walk away.
She calls it Eremition.
Yes.
Like the title of the book.
Exactly. That stepping back to reconnect with yourself.
Right. Creating space.
Exactly. To reflect and create a life that feels authentic.
Yeah. That's great. So we went from the complexities of love and relationships to like self-awareness and boundaries. And now she kind of shifts to looking outward at society.
Yeah, this is where we see her social commentary.
Yeah.
And she tackles some big issues like, corruption, work culture,
Mm-hmm.
even reflects on Gloria Romero.
Yeah. So let's start with corruption.
Okay.
She has this analogy from the Atlantic.
Yeah, about the cold pool.
The cold pool. Do you dip your toes in? Or do you jump all the way in?
Right. It's a great way to think about it. Are we slowly desensitized to these corrupt practices, or is there a defining moment when we cross that line?
And she kind of hints that even small compromises can lead to a slippery slope.
Right.
And then she has this story about a one-time slip-up
Yes.
that really reinforced for her that you need to stay vigilant against temptation.
It's a good reminder
Yeah.
because, our choices have ripple effects.
Right, even those small ones.
Even those small ones. And what I find really fascinating here is how she links personal accountability
Yeah.
to this broader societal issue of corruption.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's a reminder that we all play a part.
And speaking of choices, she talks about bare minimum work culture.
Yes.
Just going through the motions.
Oh, yeah. It's like a lack of engagement.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah.
And she has this analogy in a LinkedIn post about our bodies being like devices.
Right. When our phone battery is low, we recharge it.
Right.
But when it comes to our own well-being, we push ourselves to the limit.
That's true.
That's such a good point.
We don't give ourselves that recharge.
Yeah. Self-care is not a luxury. It's a necessity.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And then she gets into Gloria Romero.
Yeah. The queen of Philippine movies.
Yeah, and her passing.
It's a reminder that life is fleeting.
Right.
And it makes you think about legacy. How do we want to be remembered?
That's a good point. And that kind of ties into that theme throughout the whole book.
Yeah.
That our lives are all interconnected.
Where choices matter.
Yeah, choices matter. Yeah.
Big and small.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're all part of a larger story.
And it's interesting how she weaves that theme of interconnectedness throughout the book. Like even when she's talking about, her own personal experiences,
Right.
she manages to connect it to like these big,
Yeah.
societal or philosophical
Ideas.
ideas.
Yeah. She's always searching for meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And it leads her to explore some really fascinating concepts like Ho'oponopono,
Oh yeah, the Hawaiian.
the Hawaiian practice of forgiveness
Right.
and reconciliation.
Yeah. And it was so interesting how she talked about using it during like a stressful situation
Right.
with a food delivery.
I know that was a great story.
It just goes to show that
These ancient practices
yeah,
are still relevant
they can be applied to like
in our modern lives.
modern life. And
Yeah.
it speaks to her willingness to like be open to new things.
Yeah, be open to new experiences and new perspectives.
Yeah. And How about her reflections on her father?
Yeah, her absent father.
Instead of being angry, she's like curious.
Right, it's like she's approaching it with this sense of curiosity.
Yeah.
Trying to, like, piece together a puzzle.
Yeah, and I think that shows like real emotional maturity
Thanks,
and
sir.
empathy.
It's like she's choosing understanding over blame.
Right.
Even if it means accepting that some questions might never be answered.
Totally. And it's like, it's a good reminder that we can choose how we frame our experiences.
Absolutely.
Before we wrap up, I want to touch on her thoughts about societal labels.
Yes.
Especially like around gender and sexual orientation.
This is where you see her progressive values shining through.
And she's challenging the rigidity of labels.
Yes, she argues that they don't capture the complexity of human experience.
Yeah, and I love that line where she says, it's like trying to capture the ocean in a teacup.
Perfect analogy.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay, so we covered a lot.
We did.
Love, loss, self-discovery, societal observations.
Big topics.
And now let's end with that last part of the book.
The golden thread.
The golden thread, about the connections that matter.
Yeah, this is all about human connection, starting with listening.
Oh, that's such a good point. Like actually listening.
True listening.
Without judgment.
Without giving unsolicited advice.
Oh my gosh, yes.
It's so true.
We're always so quick to jump in and try to fix things.
Yeah.
But sometimes people just need to be heard.
Just to be heard.
Yeah, and it's not always easy.
No, it's not.
She talks about those emotional vampires.
Oh, yeah.
That drain your energy.
You know, those people who just leave you feeling depleted after every interaction?
Yeah, but she also talks about, like, nurturing the good relationships.
Yes, those that bring us joy and support.
Yeah, gotta put in the effort.
Like anything we value, you know, friendships need tending.
And she tells that great story about her grandfather who wouldn't accept a gift.
Yeah, from the bank clan, because it felt like a bribe.
And that shows how important, like, integrity is.
Integrity and principles.
And she ends with a really beautiful, like, definition of family.
An expanded definition.
It's not just blood ties.
It's about love and support.
Yeah.
It's about connection.
So I think Claire would say, you know, go pick up Eremition.
Yeah, see what speaks to you.
Yeah, I mean, her reflections on love and loss and just the search for meaning.
It might inspire you to start journaling.
Yeah.
Or explore some of those practices she talks about.
It's an invitation to embrace our shared humanity and find the beauty in life.
Even the messy parts.
Yeah, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.